Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much for participating in this conference. This is the 100 years anniversary for Women's Day. So USJ is holding this conference for all the women to sit together to celebrate this day. This is a series conference of 3 days. So today and 23rd and 30th. Here we have 3 speakers for today. So Ms. Angela Lam, Professor Navish, and Professor Cohier. Mrs. Angela Lam is an intellectual at USJ. She is also an art historian with the infinite admiration for the Asians. She studied the Chinese and the European art at the University of Hong Kong, and then specialized in Italian Renaissance at the University of East Anglia. Then she went to Rome, where she was not only immersed in art, but she also encountered her husband and the Italian language, Latin original, which opened up her way toward the Latin calligraphy, historical documents in their original, as well as book art. In this occasion, she will show us some marvelous renditions of a queen and how she gathered power from different parties to make her immortal. Let's welcome Ms. Angela Lam.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Shall I move there? Yeah. Just put this here. Wait. Let me also grab my glass. Glass of water. I'm not going to speak a lot, even though I'm grabbing my glass. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. The topic of our conference is actually, the conference title is actually a very nice one. It is Women with bracket out without power. Before I speak about the Queen, let me, please permit me to say something about power, some personal experience about power, the idea of power itself. Before that, I think I should open just one moment. Let me just open this, and yeah, power. Now, power, I personally think that we all have some sort of power. Even though, we may not be aware of that. I still remember, I used to work in a huge library, and when I was the smallest potato in the library, my job was reshelving books. It was, elementary, just, a very tedious, not really tedious, it's monotonous task for anyone newly entered into a library is to reshelve books. And I thought, hey, small potato. And I had no say over the use of catalog, search system, no say about what system we are going to adopt, no say about how we are going to index a certain text or blah 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 blah, no say over anything. My job was just monotonously put books back. At a certain point, I recall an incident of a reader, desperate reader, how she was driven nuts because of a misplaced item. She was desperately looking for that book, and we know that it is in the library because the electronic catalog says it is checked in, which means it must be there, but where is it? It drove her nuts, and then I understood that the reshelving staff, that is to say the smallest potato, has actually great power to decide whether the life of library staff or the life of library patron in a library is easy or not. And that is actually great power. If you are desperately looking for something and simply because of a misplace of the thing, of the item, it is actually great effect. It produced, great effect on the others. And I suddenly, if I realize, if I think about this, rationalize this incident, it is actually, the smallest potato had at that point. Even if you call the chief librarian wouldn't be able to help in that sort of incident. And so I start to realize that actually everyone has some sort of power. And another story, another personal experience has to do with myself as a woman and as a mother. I remember when I got pregnant, I had never imagined myself getting pregnant, and I wasn't ready, to become a mother. The truth was that. But when I got pregnant, no way now, you're pregnant, what can you do? Read books, learn about what will happen. I started to read literature and books about labor, the climax of the end and the climax. And I started to read books about labor. Oh, it was rendered in such a way this is intolerable, impossible, unbearable moment. Great suffering. Bang. I had a labor. My labor lasted for 24 hours. But at the moment when I felt the greatest sort of suffering, I felt the greatest power. I thought I am the most powerful person in the world in that moment because I was like, I had a power like God. I produce life. Isn't it? Who else can produce life? It is not something that, you go to a factory and you produce objects. You can even produce very expensive objects. You can even produce very valuable things, but life is not something that anyone can produce just at any point as you like. And at the so-called intolerable, unbearable suffering, I felt the greatest power. And that gives me the idea that we actually have everyone has some sort of a power in our experience. And the third thing I want to share is about, well, power or not, it really depends on how you see it. It really depends on how you perceive it. Tears, for example, we seldom associate tears, tears, we seldom associate that with power. That is actually some sort of a symbol of weakness. Well, yes, if a masculine soldier cries, he looks a little bit weak. But tears can be very powerful, can be very useful for some people, especially babies. When babies, start to cry, he was the most powerful person in the world. You stop all you are doing and you attend to the baby because of his tears. Nice, isn't it? And so, tears and weakness and power, it really depends whether you have power. It really depends how you see the thing, how you perceive the thing. And now I have done a little bit study because of this conference. I need to, because of the title actually, I need to investigate a little bit. I need to research a little bit on this power. Where do we get power? Well, some people can be born already with power. Aristocrats in the 17th century, for example, in the past, if you were born a prince, then you automatically have power. Or, like now in our democratic society, we can have delegated power, delegated authority. If you were elected a president, you have power from the people. And then wealth, purchasing power, is another source of power, or special ability, skill, or knowledge. For example, our IT people, they are very powerful. And force, physical force. I'm more powerful than my son. I always beat him. That is simply force. And charisma. What if we don't have access to the power that we desire? Now, if we are lack of funds, we can go to the bank, we borrow some money. If we don't have the power we want, at times we can even consider borrowing. For example, let me show you, but the topic for today is actually about this woman. My topic is actually Marie de Medici. Now, I don't know whether any one of you cares about Maria de Medici. I don't. She's just a queen. She is just one of the very many queens in the past. I wouldn't care about her. She didn't do, what did she do? She is not like Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth. They changed their country. Catherine de Medici, very important in European politics at her time. Maria de Medici, she was just a queen, and she was sort of banished from the court because of her sort of, because more or less because of her struggle for power, but she was not very clever in doing that, so she just got banished twice from the court. Why would I bring her up though if I don't care about her? This is the queen. I got interested in her because of Peter Paul Rubens. Peter Paul Rubens, the painter. So here we have the queen and we have the painter. Now the queen had all kinds of authority at her time. Political power, she had all the purchasing power, and she luckily also had intellectual power, she had taste, and she knew whom to commission paintings from. And she has chosen Peter Paul Rubens. Now, at that time, she was more powerful than him. She made him work, but she, the queen, by her own marriage, she wouldn't be remembered at all. She would be thrown into obliteration soon after her death. Because, her life was really, she was just one of the very many queens. If she were not painted by Peter Paul Rubens, and now we got interested in her at all, we would investigate in her life, we would research, many papers written about her, because she was portrayed in his portrait. She didn't have the power to get herself remembered, but she could use the power of Peter Paul Rubens to make her immortal. Now, I don't know who is more powerful though. She started the thing, she made him work, and he had the power to make her immortal. So it was like, people like to think, art historians like to think that Peter Paul Rubens is a powerful one. But she made the choice. She started that. She could have, like many other queens, without leaving anything. But she started that, so somehow I think they are equally powerful. Now see, Marie de Medici borrowed power. From whom? Now from Rubens, she sort of purchased his special skill and power to make her immortal. But actually, Marie de Medici borrowed power as well. Painting cycles. She commissioned 21 paintings. It's a painting cycle on her not very interesting life. Okay, so here the format itself is borrowed from the Virgin Mary, because painting cycles of that scale. Now here we have the Virgin Mary, the life of the Virgin Mary presented as a fresco cycle in the Tornabuoni Chapel. This format, a cycle on the life of a figure, was usually used on only 3 kinds of people: Jesus Christ, male saints, St. Anthony, St. Francis, and the third is the Virgin Mary, the only female being represented, being commemorated in paintings in that way. The only female figure was the Virgin Mary. Now, she commissioned, she commissioned the great painter to paint a very elaborate 21 paintings about her own life. So, by choosing this format, not only one painting, not only one portrait, not only one ceiling about herself, but a series of 21 paintings. The format itself, she sort of borrowed some glory from the Virgin Mary. I am not going to go into details of all the scenes. Just want to show you certain interesting specific one. I will just highlight some of them. And my topic was, see, in and out of the frame. And so I will just give you some facts, in and out of the frame. In the frame, she looks like that. Out of the frame, we'll see. We will see. Sorry. Let's see this one. The destiny of Marie de Medici. She was not just any person, not just any child. She was like the Virgin Mary, like Jesus Christ. Her life was programmed, was planned beforehand by the great gods and goddesses. Here, on top we have Zeus and Juno, the god and goddess of all gods. And then we have these 3 figures. They are the 3 fates. What are they doing? They are weaving. They are weaving the life of Marie de Medici. So, already predestined that she would be a queen. She would be of some sort of importance. And then, wow, the birth of a princess. She even had a halo. Looked quite like child Jesus. She had a halo. And here we have the river god, is the god of her town. The river god, in her town, she was born in Florence, and that was a very important river for them, is the Arno. And then we already have Pluto, the angels, playing on the shield of her with her family arms. So that means, even the gods were very pleased with her birth, things like that. Now here we have education of the princess. You see, the princess was not educated by, kids teacher, or how do you call that, tutor. She was educated by Minerva, Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The one, you see, the one. Can we sort of have a dimmer? No. Do you see the? Oh, thank you, Anna. So here, the girl. Well, let me stand. The girl here is Marie de Medici in her youth. And here we have, you see the helmet. This is the goddess Minerva. She had Minerva as a tutor. And she had Mercury, it's quite dark. Can't see. Mercury, the hovering one. Mercury is handing something down. And so we have Mercury handing down something. What did he hand down is this. Is the caduceus. You see, caduceus is made of serpents, snakes. But this is actually the symbol of healing power. We will sometimes see that in our pharmacy, and it's a symbol of medicine because it comes from the brazen serpents, and they have it's the symbol of healing power. So we have Mercury handing down this to her with very dark that we can't quite see. And then we have the very beautiful three graces. They are the symbols of perfect femininity, perfect fertility. And then we have the god Apollo showing her how to play a cello. Well, it's an ancestor of a cello. So here we have a very, we expect a very educated Marie de Medici. Now, the courtiers of her court wrote diaries. And we got the information that, at the court, she was quarreling with other mistresses in an horrendous manner, in an unbearable language. That was her education then. Okay, we can move forth. A presentation of her portrait to a Henry IV. Henry IV is this man, this gentleman. She was in Florence, and to contract a marriage, he wanted to see her image, and so her image was presented to the king. And then we have a woman advisor. Who is that woman? The woman back there. She is France. She is the personification of France. So the whole nation was sort of telling him, yeah, sharing admiration, yeah, this is the one, she's good, take her, something like that. So here we have the personification of France. Now, note that France, she will appear, this lady figure, she will appear again and again in this fresco cycle. How was she represented? Actually, like a Amazon warrior, like a woman warrior, with one breast bare, like that. So here we have not even the king desired her, but actually France, the whole nation. And then we have the wedding by proxy. This is sort of a historical scene. And then, wow, the disembarkation at Marseille. Now here, she was having this wedding in Florence. And the gentleman giving her the ring is not the king, just wedding by proxy. He was actually the uncle of it's the nephew of the king, the ambassador of France, and he was giving her the ring on behalf of the king. And so that was not the true wedding. So after the wedding by proxy, she embarked on a boat, a very elaborate one, a very luxurious one, and she arrived at France, at Marseille. Now the problem here is the king didn't come, and she was not married to the king as a queen. She was just a mistress. The truth is that she was married to the king just as a mistress, and of course the king will not come to pick her up. Who came? Now here we have France again, the same figure of the same personification of France. So the king didn't come, the whole nation came. France came to receive her. And now the Amazon warrior, the woman brave warrior, become like a gallant, like a gentleman. She came to receive her, pick her up. And the truth is, we have very little record about her arrival at Marseille. And probably it wasn't anything big at all. The king actually received her at Lyons, and they had some sort of an official ceremony there. At Marseille, probably nobody cared. Okay, That was just my surmise. It is because of the lack of record. Now then we have the birth of the birth of the dolphin, of the prince, the baby, the birth of the dolphin. Now notice that this woman is quite like, for Chinese or people who know Chinese history, she is actually quite like our Empress Qixi, in the sense that Empress Qixi became the queen, the empress, because of a male heir. She was a concubine, but she could give her husband a male heir, and so she became queen. Likewise, Marie de Medici was a mistress, but she bore 6 children. The biggest one was the future Louis XIII. And she was married here. This wedding took place in 1600. And she gave birth to Louis XVI, 1601. Very swift, isn't it? And so, but the truth is that she wasn't crowned as a queen immediately afterwards. We will see that. So she got a rise in status because of the son. In Chinese, let me say 4 words. 母凭子贵 is this story. Okay, and then here we have the consignment of the regency because the king had to go to war and for war, and so before he left, he entrusted the infant child, the prince, and the whole France. This is France. This ball, this scepter, is France. So he entrusted the country and the prince to her. Okay, now the coronation in Saint-Denis finally took place 10 years after, 1610. It's the day before the king left for the war, and it's actually it's actually the day before he died. So this is more or less historical, and she didn't sort of manipulate anything. And then we have the death of Henry IV. You see, the king was being pulled up into a heaven. Here we have all the gods and things. And we have victory. This figure is victory. She has wings. And she was kind of in anguish. And she was very sad. And then we have our queen. Her gesture was like that. Very modest, very devoted, quite like the Virgin Mary. And she was being offered the whole nation of France by Mercury. No, sorry, this is France. This is France, so that's the personification of France. She is offering her the power, and this is not her hand. Her hands are here. Somebody, Providence, received the power for her. She was like kind of modest. I don't know whether she is that modest, but we will see. We will find it out. The Council of Gods. The Council of the Gods. Now, if Cardinal Richelieu or people like Claude Morgis, who is the abbot of St. Ambrose, if these people could be considered as gods, then yes, her council were made up of gods. Council of the Gods. So she, she had all these Jupiter, Apollo, Athena, being her advisors. But actually, in fact, she had people like this, Cardinal Richelieu. And then we have her only victory in her whole life. That is the only her only achievement. That is at that war, she somehow suppressed and helped to keep that region in peace, and that was I don't know whether she really went to fight, but that was her victory. And then we have the exchange of the princesses. Why would we have this exchange? Is for the marriage that she contracted with the countries, so as to keep their allies. And again, we have a France here presenting the French princess. Then Felicity, the Felicity of the Regency. Felicity. Very often we understand that as happiness, but when applied to a monarch, it is successfulness. And I don't know how successful it was. It seems that there were riots and things around, and her son was not very happy with her. But in any case, this was the very nice image. Then we have Louis the Louis XIII comes of age. Now, here it seems that she is showing him. Now, here you are going to steer the ship of France. Here we have the personification of France, and then here we have all these goddesses rolling boats. She is force, and she looks, her image is very close to Marie de Medici, as if she was actually the one really moving forth the country. And if you take a look at this king, he looks very stiff. Particularly stiff. Now it looks as if she was offering him the authority, but the truth is, here we have dates. The coming of age ceremony took place in 1614. Okay, and this comes of age, this scene, she actually hand over her power unwillingly in 1617. And so, now here we have the very familiar story of Qi Xi. Once you got power, you never really want to hand it over. Image and facts, they are very different. Now here, by being surrounded by gods and things, and painted by a great painter, she got this power of being remembered. And then, so it happened in 1617, her son actually used her military force, to drive the queen away from Paris, and the son got power. She was driven away from Paris, and she was imprisoned in Blois. And there, she somehow escaped from the imprisonment, helped, protected by France herself. This is the figure of France. France was helping her to escape. Well, mess. And then her own force sort of was defeated. Then it came to some sort of negotiation, better not fight, better make peace with the king, blah, 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 blah. So we have this negotiation, and we have the messenger, Mercury, handing over olive, a branch of olive. So here we have this, as if she was very willing. And then we have the queen opts for security, that is the signing of the treaty. She was somehow forced to sign a treaty with the king. And here we have her going into the temple of security. And then we have the reconciliation of the queen and her son. The queen, it is like we don't know where she is. She is like ascending into the sky. But then below, we still have some landscape. But she is like, being taken up to the sky. It's quite close to a very known, popular image of the Assumption of the Virgin. So this is more or less, in and out, the life of this queen and what she really did and what was portrayed, what was painted, and it was a great power of imagination of Peter Paul Rubens, that we have these marvelous paintings about the life, about the not very interesting life of a queen. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So next, we will invite Professor Christina Nevish to give her talk. Professor Nevish is an assistant professor at USJ, and her topic today is Cape Verde and Macau so far, yet so close. The never-ending saga of many brave unknown women. I would like to introduce Professor Nevish a little bit before she starts. And she's Professor Nevish holds a PhD degree, and she holds a degree on foreign language teaching at the University Nova de Lisboa, and the translation degrees at the University of Mainz in Germany. She has been teaching foreign languages abroad for 14 years, so in different countries, covering all levels and all ages. She has a PhD degree on social linguistics and second language acquisition at the University at Zurich. So we welcome Professor Nevish.
Do I need it? Really?
Hello.
Okay. So, as the title of the presentation suggests, I will talk about those many nameless women whose history is seldom mentioned, especially on the Women's Day. In order to do so, I'll take the geographic areas of Cape Verde and Macau as a starting point to travel through time back to the encounter between the Europeans and the native peoples of Africa and Asia. So, first of all, I will start by giving some additional data about both territories, which are far away from each other, not only geographically. Both regions have in common the fact that they were discovered by the Portuguese, discovered and settled, by the Portuguese, and it is impossible to mention the Portuguese discoveries without referring to the notion of Lusotropicalism as it was introduced by Gilberto Freire. While traveling back to the 15th and 16th centuries, I will discuss the social organization of those times, bearing in mind the women's role in those societies. Last but not least, I'll summarize the major literary motifs of women writers, considering these as a way of grasping women's condition in these two countries. Nowadays, these Cape Verde and Macau have apparently nothing in common, except for the fact that geographically they are both insular territories. Economically, the gross domestic product per capita reached in 2009 $4,100 US in Cape Verde and almost $40,000 US in Macau. Cape Verde is still an emerging or developing economy. According to the International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook report of October 2009. Macau is a very rich city, built on entrepot, trade, gambling, and port services. The economy in Cape Verde is on the opposite, based on tourism. Demographically, they have almost the same number of inhabitants, as you can see, with about 400,000 inhabitants. Historically, they are bound not only because they were both a strategic point in the routes of the Portuguese discoveries, but also because they became Creole territories, both social and linguistically. Cape Verde was a strategic point between two routes, Europe and America, as you know, and Europe and India. Macau was an interesting marginal trading portal. So, as you can see, far away from each other, but still insular. As both countries are connected historically by the Portuguese discoveries, it is inevitable to mention the notion of Lusotropicalism, as I said before, the unique form of Portuguese colonialism introduced by Gilberto Freire. Miscegenation was from very early on common in Portuguese colonial spaces. Sexual intercourse with the women the Portuguese encountered in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean is one of the most fruitful byproducts of Portuguese colonialism, especially in Brazil. Nevertheless, the Portuguese put in place the mechanisms for the slave trade that would become one of the trademarks of European colonialism. Moreover, one cannot forget that the Portuguese left only one school in Timor after 500 years of occupation, a 95% illiteracy rate in Mozambique at the time of their departure, and in Angola, a political and social situation now seemingly beyond repair. Consequently, Lusotropicalism is also associated with the inability to take responsibilities of the white race, in this case of the Portuguese. By limiting the settlement to the coastal areas, at least till the Conference of Berlin in 1884, and reducing the encounter with the other to a purely mercantilist level, Portuguese colonialism has been able to convey an image of non-aggression, although such relations and their offspring were still subject to discrimination. The situation differed greatly with regards to dealings between white women and Indian men, let alone the African slaves. In Cape Verde, the expression gente branco, white people, is still used with the meaning of people who have a high social status, not necessarily white, in opposition to gente preto, black people. Distinctive hierarchies of both race and gender operated within the contact zone. We will have a closer look at this, bearing in mind that although Cape Verde is the most creolized of all the Portuguese possessions in Africa, the process of Lusotropicalism had not developed as much as it had in Brazil. Discovered in 1445, social groups in Cape Verde were divided mainly according to skin color, although there were several subdivisions. Slaves were divided into 3 groups, as you can see in the first 3 in blue. Strange. So there were the Buçais, the slaves more recently arrived from coastal Africa, and then there were the Ladinos, who had a long permanence on the islands. They had arrived as children, had been baptized, and had already learned the Creole language. And then there were the Naturals. Those were the slaves who were born on the islands, which were not inhabited when the Portuguese discovered them. Apart from these, there were also the Chalonas or Linguas. Those were translators. They had arrived in Cape Verde at a grown-up age. Thus, they still mastered their mother tongue, and they had already learned the Portuguese language, or what was so-called Portuguese language. It was actually the Creole language. There were also 3 kinds of white people: the Portuguese, other Europeans, and the European born in the former colonies. Among the white people, we could also find the criminals who had been expelled from Europe for their illegal activities. The group of lançados deserves special attention for the role they have played in the miscegenation. They were male settlers, including traders and pirates, who took up residence mainly in the coastal Africa from the earliest period. This means mid-15th century. The majority of the lançados, European males, first entered into client-patron relationships with the prominent African males. Following that, many were given wives for the duration of their residence. In Guinea and Guinea-Bissau, the women given as wives were often slaves. The island of Bissau was the location of the most prominent Lançado Grumeto community during the beginnings of the 17th century. The Afro-Portuguese, descended from the Portuguese Lançados and their African wives, Tangomas, also there, were differentiated from the rest of the resident populations, both African and European in the area. They were called Creoles. The Afro-Portuguese women who lived at the slave plantations and factories in the coastal Africa had a position of social respect. Next to the European residents, these women were the most prosperous group on the coast. All property was passed down to those women's daughters. Apparently, among Afro-European peoples, inheritance was matrilineal, possibly reflecting the matrilineal structure of Wolof, Serer, and some Mende societies. These women were called signares in the region of Senegal. And they became Afro-European slave traders. They were known as Nharas in Guinea-Bissau and Senhoras in Gambia. The title derived from the Portuguese senhora and signified women of wealth and influence. The majority of these women possessed wealth, prestige, and several slaves and grumetos. In opposition to the slaves, grumetos were helpers of Europeans, mostly mariners and boat builders, and they were wage earning. Those grumetos who would convert to Christianity were the so-called Christians. Tribal children were sent from the interior to live among the Creoles and learn white man fashion. I also have some pictures, so that they can be also compared with some later pictures of Macau. In opposition to Cape Verde, Macau was already the Great South China trading emporium of Canton upon the Portuguese arrival in 1557, almost 100 years after the discovery of the Cape Verdean Islands. The settlement grew rapidly into a large European enclave, which the Chinese subsequently found difficult to control. A distinctive feature of traditional Chinese patrilineal descent is that a woman at marriage is assumed to be removed from her descent line, except for the acknowledgement of their immediate parents and grandparents, and assimilated into her husband's descent line. In most patrilineal descent systems around the world, a person keeps his or her affiliation throughout life. China is unusual in this. In the 16th century, it was a common practice in Macau that poor families sold daughters as the so-called Mui Tsai, little sister in Cantonese, and they were sold to wealthy ones as servants for 40 years. The young women were typically from impoverished families and sold at a younger age, under the condition that they would be freed through marriage when older. The girls were generally bought between the ages of 4 to 13. These arrangements were generally looked upon as charitable, as the young women would be provided for better as Mui Tsai than they would if they remained with their family. As very young children, their duties were to run errands, fetch articles, pick up dropped fans, and so on, or they might be placed under other servants to perform household tasks. As they grew older, their position and their work often depended on the social and economic status of the person who had bought them. In the nature of the case, some were sexually exploited by the male members of the family. Some were treated very cruelly by their mistresses. If they were attractive, they often were taken by the head of the family as a concubine. The absence of contracts in these arrangements meant though that Muay Thai might be resold into prostitution. As the Portuguese settled in Macau, they began to establish bordels with Muay Thai, but the Mandarins intervened. The Portuguese fondness for taking in Chinese girls abandoned by their parents in Macau of the late 19th and early 20th centuries is also mentioned in the literature and shocked the Chinese. These girls were often the offspring of forced relationships between Portuguese and Chinese women. Some of them were taken to Goa by the Portuguese along with Japoas, Japanese female slaves. Again, the Creoles refer here to those whose fathers were usually Europeans, not necessarily Portuguese, and whose mothers were from Asia. In the case of being male Creoles, they were called Nuns or Nhons. The women will be called Nis or Nhonhonhas. Filo-Filo da Terra were people born in Macau who ended up converting to Christianity, regardless of their ethnicity, race, or language. The only difference between a slave and a Muay Thai was that the slave served for life and his descendants inherited his status, while the servant girl received her freedom on reaching the usual age for marriage. Another activity common among some women in the Far East was the ama, a housemaid or maidservant. In opposition to the Muay Thai, amas were paid for their job. As we could see, both countries were and still are hybrid cultures. This served well as a literary motif for women writers of both countries. Nevertheless, Macau appears in the literature as the city of refuge, as it is the case of the Olinda da Conceição, whereas Cape Verde is deemed to emigration and recalled in the literature for its morabeza, its innate way of living on the islands. In fact, diaspora makes part of Cape Verdean people's life. Songs of Cesaria Evora account for this. Men started to emigrate to America and Europe, leaving women in charge of the hard work and children education. Following that, women's role on Cape Verdean islands has been of major importance for the society. Nowadays, Cape Verdean women emigrate as well. They make part of a global underclass with limited opportunities for upward mobility, limited access to social and political institutions, and transnational ties that pose a challenge to the concepts of nation, citizenship, representative democracy, and universal rights. Kinship and friendship often play a significant role on Cape Verdean immigration. Macau is rather an immigrant destination as it developed an export manufacturing market in the 80s, but lacked sufficient cheap labor in the local market to supply the factories. As insular regions, there is no flora and fauna to speak of, as buildings have filled up most of the available space in Macau, and drought is a constant menace in Cape Verde. Nevertheless, in the case of the latter, and bearing in mind the migrated population, writer's childhood is often referred to as a nostalgic moment of their roots, of which the sea and other elements of the nature make part. Identity issues are also present in both literatures. We can distinguish a number of interacting social, racial, and linguistic component groups during different periods of contact between Europeans and the other, of which Cape Verdean and Macanese people are just an example. Insular areas, miscegenation, creolization, and the low social status are some of the elements to which these women were subject over centuries, getting their history closer to each other. Nevertheless, they distance themselves by economic pursuits. Nowadays, the Cape Verdean woman feels between two cultures, one that is not really African and either is it Western. Unemployment and climate characteristics make it difficult to live in Cape Verde. The same does not happen with the Macanese woman, who is cosmopolitan and could find her place as the intermediary of two cultures. Yes, they were so far, yet so close. Now, they are even further from each other than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, the last not least, we would like to invite Professor Anna Cohere to give her speech. So Professor Anna Cohere is working in the University of St. Joseph, and she earned her master's in educational management, as well as her PhD in science of education from University of St. Joseph. And she has worked in different continents, in European countries and also in Asia, in different schools. She is currently teaching introduction to sociology, social theory, and sociology research methods. So let's welcome Professor Cohere.
Good evening to everybody, and thanks for being present. This presentation has a very different topic from the previous ones. I'm going to talk about Macau. And, living Catway, imagining the female body in Macau is somehow maybe a weird title, but I hope to make sense of it later. I'm going to read because I'm a little nervous. The first time I saw them, I was mesmerized, like many others, by their iconic and powerful presence. The three living models catwalking around the shopping mall, exceptionally tall, stylish, and with a blank expression on their faces. They were not smiling or talking or just hanging out, as girlfriends usually do when shopping together. They looked like aliens, or at least they didn't look totally human. Those walking bodies advertising expensive clothes were what we call objectified bodies, women serving as commodities to attract clients to the mall. Maybe some of you recognize the site, the shopping mall, and the three girls, because they are really awkward, at least in the social context of Macau. They are supposed to be role models to local women, but in fact, each time a local woman looks at them, most probably feels uncomfortable and frustrated due to the huge difference between the body type of their northern Chinese fashion models and the average size of Macau female population. Something must be wrong behind this kind of advertisement approach. Following the story, I intend to take this opportunity to show the increase in women's objectification in the media during the last decade and to analyze the potential consequences of this phenomenon to the local culture. I think you recognize also these images in Taipei. It is very common to listen people saying that they do not really pay much attention to ads, and therefore they are not affected by them. In fact, the former statement is probably true for many of us, but regarding the latter, it is not the case. People usually underestimate the influence of media in their decisions, actions, and values because they do not take into account how deeply the persistent, pervasive, and subliminal advertisement messages can leave their marks in our subconscious. The primary purpose of ads is to sell products, and their first obligation to potential clients is to spread information about the product, assuming that clients are rational beings capable of rational decisions. This might have been true somewhere in the past, but became obsolete long ago. In the mass communication and global economy era, advertisements do not really play in this ground. On the contrary, they explore the emotional side of consumers, trying by all means instill in their target groups, men, children, and women, emotional impairment. Their message is, you are not okay the way you are. You need to buy our product in order to be rescued from your miserable condition. In this process, I'm sorry, in this, okay. Well, this image is regarding to the use of children in advertisement. As I said, the target groups are men, women, and children, and sometimes also animals. But I don't mention them here. You need to buy your product in order to be, In this process, women are the most targeted. Ads' purpose is, most of the time, to make them feel unattractive, insecure, depressed, frustrated, anxious, ugly, and thus willing and searching for change, no matter the price. Mass and visual media industry is a cultural construction. Therefore, it reflects the particularities of cultural scenarios. Western and Chinese advertisement industry addresses different cultural values and rely on diverse techniques due to the moral, historical, aesthetical, and physical diversity between the two cultures. However, global marketing campaigns are gradually blurring their differences, as we'll see later in this presentation, not without some negative consequences to the body image of women and, to a lesser extent, men. In what concerns to Chinese women, they carry out a long history of submissiveness, well illustrated by the practice of foot biting. During the Cultural Revolution, they were rescued for a fate controlled by their fathers, husbands, and sons, but they ended up victims of the new state patriarchy. They were given the possibility to enter into the public arena of social production, but they were kept prisoners of the national biopolitical project for reproduction. Their move from the home to the factory is depicted in the profuse visual media industry of the period. Women were asked to emulate the masculine model, and to attain this ultimate goal, they were injected with the notion that large breasts and all other signs of femininity looked disgraceful. State discourse taught them to cover arms and legs under baggy gray or blue pants and blouses, keep the hair short cut, and hide all the body curves as much as possible. During the revolutionary years, Macau was positioned in the margins of the turbulence, and the winds of the communist movement have crossed the city just like a tender breeze. Local women were mostly tied up to the Portuguese colonial law and costumes, well known by its conservative politics toward women. Therefore, they didn't directly benefit from the conquests made possible by Women's Federation and several state politics implemented to foster women's equal rights in China, nor suffered the process of gender erasure like their continental neighbors. This means that throughout the 20th century, Macau did not experience the tremendous ups and downs that entrenched the lives of millions of Chinese women. This means also that, while in the Chinese major metropolis, women in olive gray army clothes were replaced by fashionable girls in television advertisements, newspapers, magazines, and billboards, more and more sexually appealing over the years, this phenomenon also didn't take place in Macau to the same extent. The political and geographical marginality of Macau, although its public image and produced identity as a cultural melting pot and a bridge between West and East, dictated a smoother evolution in the way women's role in society was addressed. The representation and the treatment of women by the media in Macau during the 80s and 90s, although following the general trends in the direction of a more and more consumerist society, colonized by worldwide corporations and having Hong Kong as model, was kept under the rigid supervision of patriarchal values, norms, and practices. Even a big metropolis like Hong Kong showed some concerns regarding the boundaries of what was considered acceptable and not acceptable under the umbrella of the Chinese culture. I'm going to show you now, if I am successful, or I want to show you two different advertisements. They are advertisement shampoo, so the product is the same. One is Chinese, made in China, and the other one is Western. And if we compare these two advertisements, we can see that behind them are different values, different concepts of life, of good and bad, of beauty, of intimacy, of the boundaries between what is considered moral and not moral, but I will face some technical difficulties, so please be patient. Okay, this is one of them.
Not really.
This one was the Western. Now
Play?
I could show you more, but I think these two are so no comment. Well, what I had here to say about this is the notions of intimacy are so different in both cultures, and what is considered as appropriate behavior, it's also cultural laden, and it's in this era of globalization we can still see the differences between cultures. We can also observe that usually in Hong Kong ads, the body is not positioned at center stage because the emphasis goes to the group of people portrayed and their vivid interaction. One explanation, this is not about Hong Kong, it's about China, but in Hong Kong we can also observe this characteristic in many ads. One explanation to this phenomenon relies on Hofstede's theory of national cultures. In fact, China is perceived by Hofstede as a culture that emphasizes interdependence and connection, one where people highly rely on kinship relations and respect hierarchy inside and outside the family, being the elders and the men always in the top positions of any conceivable rank. These characteristics can easily be seen in the Macau advertisement industry, where ads often use family groups and family contexts to sell products. Although I don't have any image about Macau advertisements, I think you watch TV sometimes and can also confirm what I am saying about Macau advertisement. The USA culture, on the contrary, has been perceived by Hofstede as the most individualistic culture in the world. That is to say, a culture that values independence, individual power, and self-made success. All these ideals are profusely reflected in USA ads, which emphasize first and foremost the image of the body. The body, not any body, but the masculine, toned, firm, and tall body is the symbol of personal control and personal power. And usually the masculine body is dressed, and when is not dressed, still keep his dignity. What doesn't have when we have the women's body, as we see in a moment. The female idealized body is seen as slender and taller than the average Western women, and during the last decade became became thinner and thinner, sometimes looking like stereotypical drug-addicted users with a blank-looking black makeup and blue lips, like Kate Moss here in the image. The fashion industry, particularly, select models that look like exhausted, injured, and objectified bodies. In these images, violence against women looks a natural part of society. Visual media with commercial purposes not only depict violence against women, but also spread images that seems to glorify it. Through the oversaturation of images that degrade and humiliate women by reducing them to mere objects of sexual pleasure, most people start accepting that violence, sexual harassment, rape, and prostitution are natural ingredients of life and are all acceptable. Through ads, women are seen as silent, with their lips tightened, as slaves, her bodies banded with ropes, as fresh corpses covered with blood, dismembered in occasions, showing usually the breasts, legs, or hips as dolls, toys, and gifts to pleasure others, not to be pleasurable to ourselves, as things, sexual objects, as wild animals, especially in the case of women of color, dressed in leopard skins, with their bodies covered with tattoos and iron stamps as if they were slaughterhouses animals. Over and over again, the dignity is denied to women through the fashion industry, the female body being manipulated and humanized in many unthinkable and outrageous ways. And the general obsession with laces, as you see usually in shoes, dresses, in my opinion, are tremendous because they want to represent women as gifts. Because when we prepare a gift, usually you put laces on it. Is it something to give, to please others? And is it difficult sometimes to buy one pair of shoes if we don't want to buy ones with laces? It's tremendous. Well, this body language is also very expressive of modesty, lack of confidence. And here is the symbol of happiness, marriage. So beautiful. Many women, pressured to conform to the beauty ideal portrayed by ads, although unreachable to them due to genetic differences, are willing to risk their health and suffer great pain in order to respond to what they were induced to imagine would be a more attractive look. This pursuit of perfection has been largely explored by the profitable cosmetic surgery industry. Chinese women, exposed every day to Western media beauty standards, they dream about having a more European look and undergo painful surgery aiming to change their faces and their bodies from head to toe. The most painful of them, the leg extension surgery to increase height, now officially banned, except for medical reasons, left many women with nerve damage and several kinds of deformities. Some of them ended up permanently crippled. For some young women, cosmetic surgery as being first and foremost about taking one's life into one's own hands. Wow, difficult to understand. This contemporary construction stands in line with the right that women should have over their bodies, like the right to reject unwanted pregnancy or the right to look sexy at the age of 50. Although the argument requires further analysis due to its complexity, to me it's difficult to understand how can, for instance, someone consider that she is liberating herself through the use of cosmetic surgery, a procedure that only works out if continually undertaken. Most women endure cosmetic surgery because they perceive that employers and Chinese bachelors think that a tall woman with round and large eyes, breast implants and Western look is a better prospective employee and wife. This mindset is well reported by young Chinese women, according to whom the quest for better looks works out when it comes to find a husband or a place in the labor market. After the body transformation, a woman may discover that her new look gives her the self-confidence that enables her to assert herself more forcefully at work. But is it reasonable and fair that to improve her life prospects, she needs to get her body nipped, tucked, sucked, injected, and implanted? All of these to please others? And what about Macau? In the 80s and 90s, the city used to have a weak presence of ads in public spaces, and most of them were created by local artists with modest resources. One of the shifts that everyone can observe all around, since the casinos have mushroomed and became part of the urban landscape in Macau, is related to the advertisement industry. Billboards landed together with the gigantic casinos and brought a new kind of visual colonization to the city. They are windows to a different world, one that the majority of the local population will never meet in their lifetime. They are a powerful source of education because they are everywhere. They use body language to communicate with us, and they are glamorous. But what do they teach? What do they communicate? The fashion models and actresses provide unrealistic role models to local women, leading the latter to make unfavorable comparisons and that end up with low self-esteem and unhappiness. And in what concerns adolescents, because they are more vulnerable to body image, perhaps more serious consequences can arrive, like serious eating disorders, which have been for some years a major health problem in Western societies. Apart from the fashion models having absolutely nothing to do with real women, local women, yet and again they teach about converting women into sexual objects, into prostitutes, into rape victims. And the message doesn't target only women. They teach the young that violence is fashionable and pleasurable, much better than playing football or mahjong. And they teach that young members need to perform the traditional rituals if they want to be accepted by the elder gangsters. They need to respect the godfather, or else. And their wives need to continue to perform the household duties as before. This is advertisement in Macau. This is what we have. Isn't it a message to young boys and girls to drop out schools and search for easiest opportunities to quickly reach a pleasurable and glamorous life? When market does not govern itself in what concerns ethic and moral obligations to the public, regulatory agencies should step in and impose regulations in order to protect public health and youth education and promote valuable, enduring moral values and respect not only towards others, but to oneself. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And now we have some time. Maybe any one of our participants would like to share your thoughts, comments, your inputs. Do you like the talks? Yes. Interesting. Yes. And what inspiration you have got? Okay. So thank you very much again for all wonderful talks. We also prepared some refreshments and drinks. Maybe we can talk, over the drinks. Thank you for your participation. And we have a serious talk next Tuesday, another next Tuesday. So please continue to join us. Thank you.